Everything you were taught about raising meat efficiently on a small homestead is built on a single assumption that nobody bothered to question. The assumption is that pigs are your best converter of feed into flesh. They are not even close. There is an animal that has been raised on every inhabited continent for thousands of years, an animal that converts feed into edible meat at a ratio that makes hogs look like an extravagance, and that animal is the domestic rabbit. One doe rabbit, properly managed, can produce over 300 pounds of dressed meat in a single year. A sow pig, by comparison, averages around 160 pounds of dressed meat per piglet cycle when you account for the feed she consumes during gestation and nursing. The rabbit does this on roughly half the feed input, pound for pound, calorie for calorie. A backyard rabbitry outperforms a pig operation by a factor that the commercial meat industry would prefer you never calculate for yourself. So why does every farm store, every county extension office, and every agricultural magazine push you toward hogs, toward cattle, toward poultry, and almost never toward rabbits? Why is the most efficient meat animal in the history of human agriculture treated as an afterthought, a novelty, a child's pet project? That is not an accident. That is a market decision made on your behalf by people who profit from your ignorance. By the time you finish watching this, you will understand exactly why rabbit meat disappeared from the American table, who made money when it did, Nias, and how you can build a rabbitry on your own land that produces more high-quality protein than your neighbors get from animals 10 times the size, for a fraction of the cost, using materials you already have or can find for almost nothing. The domestic rabbit has been a primary meat source for human beings since at least the Roman Republic. Roman agronomists in the 1st century BC maintained elaborate warrens called leperaria, purpose-built enclosures where rabbits were bred and managed as a staple protein source for both soldiers and civilians. The Romans understood something that modern agriculture has conveniently forgotten. They understood that in a closed system where feed resources are limited, the animal that converts the least grain into the most meat is the animal that keeps your people alive. This was not sentiment. It was arithmetic. When the Roman legions moved north into Gaul and Iberia, they brought their rabbit husbandry with them, and for the next 15 centuries, the rabbit remained one of the most important meat animals in Europe. French monasteries in the Middle Ages bred rabbits with the same seriousness they applied to viticulture. By the 12th century, French monks had developed distinct breeds optimized for meat production, fur quality, and docility. These monks kept meticulous records. They knew the feed conversion ratios. They knew the breeding cycles. They knew that a single buck and 3 does could feed a monastery through winter when the cattle were dry and the grain stores were low. In America, rabbits were a backbone protein for rural families well into the 20th century. During both World Wars, the United States government actively promoted backyard rabbit raising. The USDA itself published pamphlets encouraging American families to raise rabbits for meat, calling them the most efficient small livestock available. There are archived posters from 1943 with the slogan, "Raise rabbits for victory." Millions of American families did exactly that. They raised rabbits in their backyards, in their garages, on apartment rooftops in cities. The knowledge was widespread, practical, and completely mainstream. Then the war ended, and the industrial meat complex arrived. Between 1945 and 1965, the American meat industry consolidated around 3 species: cattle, hogs, and chickens. These were the animals that could be raised in confinement at industrial scale, processed through mechanized slaughterhouses, and distributed through the emerging cold chain of refrigerated trucks and supermarket display cases. The rabbit did not fit this model. Rabbits are difficult to process on a mechanized line because of their size and skeletal structure. They do not lend themselves to the kind of massive single-species confinement operations that generate the margins Wall Street demands. The National Provisioner, a meat industry trade journal, published an editorial in 1958 arguing that rabbit meat was, quote, "a distraction from the efficiencies of modern protein production," end quote. Within a decade, rabbit had virtually disappeared from American grocery stores. The USDA stopped publishing its rabbit husbandry guides. County extension agents stopped teaching rabbit management. An entire generation of Americans grew up believing that rabbits were pets, not livestock. That belief was not organic. It was engineered by an industry that needed you buying pork at $3.40 a pound instead of raising your own meat for pennies. Now, let me explain why the rabbit is so extraordinarily efficient, because this is not folklore. This is biology, and the numbers are specific. A meat rabbit, typically a New Zealand white or a Californian, reaches slaughter weight of around 5 pounds live weight in approximately 8 to 10 weeks. The dress-out percentage, which is the amount of usable meat you get relative to the live weight, is between 53 and 58%. That is comparable to a well-finished hog and significantly better than most poultry when you account for the bones, skin, and offal. But the real advantage is not in the dress-out percentage. It is in the feed conversion ratio. Feed conversion ratio is the most important number in meat production. It tells you how many pounds of feed you need to produce 1 pound of live animal gain. For beef cattle, that number is roughly 6 to 1. 6 pounds of feed for 1 pound of gain. For hogs, it is approximately 3.5 to 1. For broiler chickens raised commercially, it is about 1.8 to 1, which is why chicken became the dominant cheap protein in America. But here is the number the industry does not advertise. For domestic rabbits raised on a standard pellet and hay diet, the feed conversion ratio runs between 3 to 1 and 3.5 to 1. That sounds comparable to hogs until you factor in the reproductive rate, which is where the rabbit leaves every other livestock animal behind. A single doe rabbit can kindle, which means give birth, 5 to 8 times per year. Each litter averages 6 to 10 kits. Even at conservative numbers, say 5 litters of 7 kits each, that is 35 offspring per year from one doe. If each of those kits reaches a dressed weight of roughly 2.8 pounds at 10 weeks, one doe produces approximately 98 pounds of dressed meat per year. Scale that to 3 does and 1 buck, a setup that fits comfortably in a space the size of a garden shed, and you are producing nearly 300 pounds of meat annually. To match that output with hogs, you would need a sow, a boar, adequate farrowing space, and roughly 2,200 pounds of feed per cycle. The rabbit operation producing this same meat output requires approximately 800 to 1,000 pounds of feed per year, and a significant portion of that can come from forage, garden scraps, and hay you grow or harvest yourself. The protein content of rabbit meat is approximately 21% by weight, higher than chicken, pork, or beef. The fat content is lower than all three, running around 8%, compared to pork's roughly 30% in typical cuts. The cholesterol level is the lowest of any common meat. This is not a marginal animal. This is, by every measurable standard, the most efficient converter of plant matter into human-grade protein available to a homesteader. Think about what that means for your land. A quarter-acre lot that could never support a cow, that would be overwhelmed by 2 hogs, can comfortably sustain a rabbitry producing enough meat to feed a family of 4 their entire annual protein requirement. The rabbit does not need pasture. It does not need a pond. It does not need a specialized barn. It needs a hutch, clean water, and feed. The simplicity of the system is precisely what made it dangerous to an industry built on complexity. So, follow the economics. When rabbit disappeared from the American diet in the 1950s and 1960s, what replaced it? Industrially produced pork and chicken. The American pork industry alone is now valued at over $26 billion annually. The broiler chicken industry exceeds $42 billion. These industries depend on a simple equation. You, the consumer, must not be able to produce your own meat cheaply and independently. Every pound of rabbit you raise in your backyard is a pound of pork or chicken you did not buy from Tyson, Smithfield, or Purdue. The economics of suppression are not subtle. They are mathematical. Consider the cost structure. A family of 4 in the United States spends an average of approximately $3,200 per year on meat and poultry, according to Bureau of Labor Statistics data from 2022. A backyard rabbitry capable of producing 300 pounds of dressed meat per year costs roughly $150 to $250 in annual feed if you are buying commercial pellets at retail prices. If you supplement with garden waste, hay you cut yourself, and forage crops like comfrey or plantain that grow freely in most American climates that cost drops to under $100. You are replacing thousands of dollars of grocery store meat with an investment measured in loose change per day. This is not a marginal savings. This is a structural shift in how a family feeds itself. The industry understood this threat early. In the 1960s, as meat processing consolidated, rabbit was systematically excluded from USDA commodity programs that subsidized the production and distribution of beef, pork, and chicken. Rabbit farmers received no price supports, no subsidized feed programs, no favorable inspection protocols. Under federal law, rabbits were classified not as livestock, but as poultry for inspection purposes until regulatory changes made even that unclear, creating a patchwork of state-level rules that made commercial rabbit production bureaucratically painful. This was not oversight. This was market protection. When you make it easy to raise and sell one product and difficult to raise and sell a competing product, the market tips exactly where you want it to tip. Your grocery bill reflects that tipping every single week. And yet, the knowledge never fully died. The Amish communities of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and Holmes County, Ohio, have raised rabbits continuously for over a century. In these communities, a rabbitry is as standard as a hen house. Amish families commonly maintain 10 to 15 does, producing between 800 and 1,500 pounds of dressed meat annually, enough to supply the family and sell or trade the surplus. Their feed costs are minimal because they grow their own hay, supplement with garden waste, and manage their breeding cycles with a precision that commercial operations cannot match because the Amish have the one thing industrial agriculture eliminates, which is direct observation and daily hands-on management. In the Sichuan province of China, small-scale rabbit production has remained unbroken for over 1,000 years. China today produces approximately 700,000 metric tons of rabbit meat annually, dwarfing every other nation. The average Chinese backyard rabbitry operates on principles identical to what your great-grandparents practiced. Small cages, local forage, rapid breeding cycles, and household-level processing. These are not primitive operations. They are optimized systems refined over generations. In Italy, rabbit is the fourth most consumed meat in the national diet. Italian families in rural Tuscany and Umbria maintain backyard rabbitries that produce between 100 and 200 kilograms of meat per year at virtually no cost beyond labor. The Italians never abandoned this knowledge because their food culture never fully industrialized at the household level. They kept their hands in the dirt and their freezers stayed full. Closer to home, there are homesteaders in the Ozarks, in Appalachia, in the rural Pacific Northwest who have maintained rabbitries through every agricultural trend of the last 70 years. One family in northern Arkansas, operating on less than 2 acres, documented their annual meat production over a 5-year period. With 4 does and 1 buck, all New Zealand whites, they averaged 312 pounds of dressed meat per year. Their total annual feed cost averaged $187. Their soil amended with rabbit manure applied directly without composting, because rabbit manure is one of the only animal manures that does not burn plants. Tested at organic matter levels nearly 3 times the regional average after just 4 years. The rabbitry was not just feeding them, it was building their soil, which was growing their garden, which was supplementing the rabbit feed, which was producing more meat. That is a closed loop. That is a system. That is what industrial agriculture does not want you to build, because a family inside a closed loop is a family that stops buying. Now here is how you do it. The foundation of a backyard rabbitry is the breeding trio, 1 buck and 2 does. You can start with 3 does if your space allows. But 2 does and 1 buck will produce more meat than most families can eat in a year. So start conservative and expand once you have the rhythm. The breed matters. You want a commercial meat breed, not a fancy show breed, and not a dwarf or miniature variety. New Zealand whites are the gold standard. They have been selected for meat production for over a century, and they are docile, hardy, and consistent producers. Californians are a close second. Either breed or a cross of the two will serve you well. You can find breeding stock from local breeders through your state Rabbit Breeders Association, through classified listings, or at county fairs. Expect to pay between $20 and $40 per animal for proven breeding stock. Do not buy from pet stores. Housing is simple. Says each adult rabbit needs a cage or hutch approximately 30 inches wide, 36 inches deep, and 18 inches tall. The floor should be 1/2 inch by 1 inch welded wire, which allows droppings to fall through for easy collection. You can build hutches from materials available at any hardware store for approximately $20 to $35 per cage. A 3-cage setup, one for the buck and one for each doe, can be built for under $100 total. Hang them inside a simple open-sided shed or under a roofline that provides shade and rain protection. Rabbits handle cold well. They handle heat poorly. If you are in the south or southwest, shade and airflow are your priorities. In northern climates, a 3-sided shelter with the open side facing away from prevailing winter winds is all you need. Feeding is where your costs stay low. A commercial rabbit pellet, typically alfalfa-based, runs between $12 and $18 for a 50-pound bag at most feed stores. One adult rabbit eats approximately 4 to 6 ounces of pellets per day, supplemented with unlimited grass hay, which you can buy in bales for $5 to $8 or cut from your own land. Here's where it gets interesting. Rabbits thrive on a wide range of forage that grows wild or can be cultivated with zero effort. Comfrey is the single best supplemental feed you can grow for rabbits. It produces enormous biomass, regrows after cutting multiple times per season, and contains protein levels between 22 and 26% in the leaf, which rivals commercial alfalfa pellets. A single row of comfrey along a fence line will produce enough supplemental feed for your entire rabbitry through the growing season. Plantain, dandelion, clover, raspberry leaves, and willow branches are all safe and nutritious rabbit feeds that most people treat as weeds or yard waste. Your lawn clippings, as long as they are not chemically treated, can supplement your feed bill every time you mow. Breeding is straightforward. Always bring the doe to the buck's cage, never the reverse. Does are territorial and may injure a buck introduced to their space. Breeding takes a matter of minutes. The gestation period is 31 days, remarkably consistent. Around day 28, place a nesting box in the doe's cage. A simple wooden box approximately 18 inches long, 10 inches wide, and 10 inches tall with one open end. She will pull fur from her chest and belly to line the nest. This is normal. She is building insulation for her kits. The kits are born blind and hairless. Do not disturb the nest for the first few days. By 10 days, their eyes open. By 3 weeks, they begin eating solid food alongside nursing. At 8 weeks, they are weaned and moved to a grow-out cage. By 10 weeks, they reach slaughter weight. Processing a rabbit is simpler than processing a chicken. There are no feathers to pluck. The hide peels cleanly. The entire process, from dispatch to packaged meat, takes a practiced person approximately 10 minutes per animal. You will need a sharp knife, a clean surface, and a supply of cold water. The first time will take longer and feel unfamiliar. By the 5th animal, it becomes routine. The meat is white, fine-grained, and mild in flavor. It takes seasoning and marinades beautifully. It roasts, braises, stews, and fries as readily as chicken. Your family may resist the idea initially if they think of rabbits as pets. This is a cultural barrier, not a nutritional one, and it dissolves the first time they taste a properly prepared rabbit roast with rosemary and garlic. The single most common mistake new rabbit raisers make is overbreeding their does. A doe can physically kindle every 31 days, but running her at that pace will burn her out within a year. Breed each doe no more than 5 to 6 times per year, allowing her at least 2 weeks of rest between weaning one litter and being rebred for the next. This pace is sustainable over a doe's productive life of 3 to 4 years and produces healthier, larger litters with higher kit survival rates. If you notice a doe producing fewer than 5 kits per litter consistently, she may need a longer rest cycle, a diet adjustment, or replacement with a daughter from one of her more productive litters. After 90 days of your first breeding cycle, you will have your first harvest of dressed meat in the freezer. After 1 full year, you will have a system that feels as natural as tending a garden, and your per-pound cost of high-quality, chemical-free meat will be lower than anything available in any store in this country. What you have just learned is not an isolated trick. It is the entry point to a system of food production that industrial agriculture has spent 70 years trying to erase from common knowledge. The rabbit is the anchor animal, but it connects to everything else on a functional homestead. The manure from your rabbitry is the finest garden fertilizer available, cold enough to apply directly to beds without composting, rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium at ratios that most commercial fertilizers try to approximate synthetically. Your garden, fertilized with rabbit manure, will produce vegetable scraps and forage crops that cycle back into rabbit feed, reducing your purchased input further every season. Comfrey, once established as a rabbit feed crop, also serves as a dynamic accumulator, pulling minerals from deep subsoil and making them available to shallow-rooted vegetables planted nearby. Your rabbitry builds your soil. Your soil grows your feed. Your feed raises your meat. Each element strengthens the others. Beyond the rabbitry itself, the same principle of efficient conversion applies to other animals that have been quietly sidelined by industrial agriculture. Coturnix quail, reaching butcher weight in 6 to 8 weeks on even less feed per pound of gain than rabbits, can be raised in the same shed, eating the same garden scraps, producing eggs at a rate of nearly 1 per day per hen. Muscovy ducks, which forage on insects, slugs, and kitchen scraps, produce rich meat and require almost no purchased feed in a system where they have access to a garden or food forest. Pigeons, once a staple protein source in European and Middle Eastern agriculture for millennia, breed continuously, feed themselves on grain scraps and forage, and produce squab, one of the most tender and nutrient-dense meats in existence, with virtually zero input cost. And every one of these animals has been crowded out of common knowledge by the same economic pressure that buried the rabbit. They are all small, efficient, and suited to household-scale production. They all undermine the grocery store model, and they are all still available to you right now if you choose to use them. The land you are standing on right now has more productive potential than you have been led to believe. That is not a motivational statement. It is an agricultural fact that can be measured in pounds of meat per square foot per year. The question has never been whether your land can feed you. The question has always been whether the knowledge of how to make it feed you would be allowed to reach you. For 70 years, the answer was no. The information was archived, defunded, reclassified, and replaced with a system that requires you to drive to a store and pay someone else for what your own soil and labor can produce better. Every generation before the industrial era understood this. Every civilization that endured understood that the family that controls its own protein supply cannot be made dependent. That understanding is not ancient history. It is a living practice, kept alive by the communities and individuals who refuse to forget. You now have what they have. What you do with it is no longer a question of knowledge, it is a question of will. The feed store is 5 minutes away. The hardware store has everything else, and your land has been waiting longer than you know. Grow what they told you to buy. Raise what they told you was impossible. The most dangerous thing you can do to a system built on dependence is to stop needing it.